Everyone, this is Henry Mark Holzer. He and his wife Erica Holzer are the ones that realized there was a long lost film version of We the Living, and they took it upon themselves to go look for it with no assurance that they would ever find anything. The film had been lost for a long time, and they thought it might never be found. But rather than me telling the story, Hank, why don't you tell it and maybe start with when you were working with Ayn Rand and you first heard about this film?
If you can turn your volume down a little, Duncan, it would help, okay?
Okay. I can also stop talking.
It's very loud. Well, the long and the short of this is, and it's a very long story, is that we represented band, and we would make house calls to her apartment to deal with the legal. After dealt with the legal, she and my late wife would talk about writing. I would drift off. And one night I heard the words Noi vivi, addio Kira, and We the Living. This was about 1966. Now, anybody who was in that milieu would know very well what that meant. My first reaction was I semi woke up while they had been talking about writing and said the equivalent of stop the presses. I mean, what? What did you say? We the Living. We the Living is a book, a very important book to an awful lot of people then and now, but a book. So then she proceeded to tell the story that, as she later found out, in 1936, the Italians wanted to write a book about the fascists, a critical book about the communists. I misspoke. So they knew about We the Living because it was a great success as a book in Italy. So they just turned around, they made the book, the whole book. And she didn't find out about it until after the war. So as soon as she said this and told the story, she added that after the war, an Italian actor by the name of Rossano Brazzi, who had a short career in the 50s and 60s, um, came to LA after the war, had a print, and showed it to her. And she was thrilled. She thought it was great, which was saying quite a lot about her. Now, to the group of people around her and other people who respected her work, um, I said, "Well, where is it? What happened? What did Brazzi do with it?" Well, nobody knows. He's gone, and the film is gone, etc. And I said, "Well, somebody has to find it." Famous last words. And she said, "No, you can't find it. I find it. I tried to find it. Brazzi tried to find it. It's very important that somebody find it, but nobody can find it." Well, to this group of people around her, we were talking here not about some, small book. This is Indiana Jones. This is Holy Grail stuff. And then the people involved are acolytes. So my late wife and I, in about 1966, started making very discreet inquiries in the Italian film world in Italy. We had to be very careful because to us, this was gold. To them, it was just another film on a list of maybe 300 of a studio that went bankrupt. So we were very delicate, we were very careful about it. And finally, we got close enough where we thought that we had it. So in 1968, we went over and were in contact that the two guys we had found in the film business. And we talked turkey and negotiated. And the second day, I think, they put us in a small Fiat car, really small. And we got into this car and they started driving to a film studio outside of Rome itself. And the roads were not great and it was bouncing around and so forth. And finally we get there and open the door and get out. And I said to one of them, well, where's the film? They then emptied the trunk of this little Fiat, and lo and behold, were a whole bunch of cans, and the film cams, and they held nitrate film. Now you say, well, what's nitrate film? Well, in those days, it was a big deal till in the 50s. I'm going to read you 3 lines of what nitrate film is. It is highly inflammable and also decomposes with age, becoming toxic. When new, nitrate film could be ignited with the heat of a cigarette. Partially decomposed, it can ignite spontaneously at temperatures as low as 120 Fahrenheit. Nitrate film burns rapidly, fueled by its own oxygen, and releases toxic fumes. It's been a long day. So there we are with all this explosive film, and they got caught in cans, and they said, well, here it is. And we had reached a tentative agreement of the price. But now we're facing this nitrate. I had done a little research on it. And I said, how do I know this is what we want? And we had to be very careful not to let them know how important this was to us. To them, it was just another film. So I had to act like we were looking at other films as well. There were hundreds. And I put them on, Duncan can tell us what it was, 2 wheels. What I had was a negative. And we put them on the 2 wheels and I turned it and it's in reverse, right? Because it's not a print. Over and over, hours I did this. And finally it was the right stuff. And that began an odyssey of years. We bought it, and that was literally only the beginning, because all they had was a print, the film. Duncan helped me out here. The original document. What was in the camera? Duncan, remind me.
The original film that was in the camera was nitrate, and that was the dangerous type of film. They did
Yeah, I mean, what
from
was
that.
it? Wasn't a print. It
No, it
wasn't
wasn't
a
a print,
print.
and
What was it? A negative.
it was
It
a
was a
negative. And as you
negative
all
that was in
know,
the camera.
what's that, Nick?
So
So
we bought it, and there was a lab there, and we had it all converted from a print to what was called a master, fine grain, and from that to something else, something else. Why do I mention this? Because at this point, it got very hairy, and a step arrangement arose during which any step in the movement of this property, which to us was, like I said, the Holy Grail, was dangerous. If they knew, they would raise the price in the conversion of the negative to the master fine grain to a duplicate negative to positive prints, flying it on Alitalia Air, which in those days which was the mid-60s, was known as kind of a joke. I mean, the stewardesses would all hang around and, screw around on the plane and whatnot. And there must have been a dozen pitfalls in this. But finally, Alitalia did not crash. It got back to New York. We breathed a sigh of relief. And one day, maybe 3 or 4 weeks later, I got a call from whatever department, I guess customs, deals with explosive objects. A very nice guy, a bureaucrat, said, Mr. Holzer, we have a problem here because we have to destroy all this film. So you can imagine the importance to the Randites, the 1936 theft of her property, the movie being made, the fascists telling the makers of the film to destroy it. The makers saying, yeah, but it's an anti-communist film. And they said, idiots, it's not just an anti-communist film. I mean, there was so much travail involved in this. Now this guy says, we got to destroy it all. Why? Because it's all nitrate. Well, he was right in the original negative and the master fine grain were, although we shipped them in, but everything made from them was not, even though on all of those objects, it said Nistrado from the printing of the original documents. And finally, I managed
Hank,
to convince him
I
that
just,
they burned the first two properties, and then it was secure. And then it spent 13 years in a film warehouse, which is another story entirely because of the Ayn Rand situation. And then Duncan, the
Hank,
Scot,
can I
entered the
jump in for a
picture.
second, Hank? Hank, let me jump
Yeah,
in for a second because I want to make sure everyone realizes what's amazing here is the film was, as you saw in the little documentary beforehand, was ordered to be destroyed by the fascists. It was hidden away and that was saved. Then it was lost for decades and presumed forever gone. And then Hank and Erica Holzer spent all this years locating it and finding it. And then they bring it back to America, and the bureaucrats, misunderstanding what the materials were made out of, said, we're going to destroy it all. So the film was going to be totally destroyed after all that, after Hank and Erica Holzer finding it. And it's just incredible. But thankfully, as Hank is saying, they recognized that the only the nitrate negative was nitrate and the other things were not. So sorry to interrupt you, Hank. I want to
oh no,
get to see if I want to see if people in the audience have some questions for you about any part of this saving of the film. So is that okay, Hank? I'll ask if there are any questions.
yeah,
Hank?
yeah,
Okay. Just, yes, go ahead. I'll repeat your question. Just wondering if any
yeah,
of the
do repeat it.
Italian, I'm going to repeat it, Hank. I'll repeat it. Any of
Yeah.
the people involved in Italian production were around to see the revised, edited film that you guys produced? And if so, what did they have to say about it? The question was, Hank, were any of the people who were originally around to make the film, were they still around to see the revised, edited version that we did back in the United States?
Well, you're really the expert on that, Duncan, because once you and my late wife started restoring it, they discovered stuff that needed work. And twice, at least twice, Duncan went over to Italy and attended to some business. But I doubt that half of it, Duncan, is true. In our time when I founded, there were people alive because you saw Bratzi and some other people. Would they have been alive at the first restoration, let alone this one, which would have probably been impossible? I don't know.
Well, you know, one person
But
who we
certainly,
did deal
certainly,
with original
the guy,
I was going to say, Hank, one
the guy who
person that
hit
we did deal with from the
the guy who hit the
production was Massimo Ferrara. Can you hear me, Hank? You saw clips of Massimo Ferrara in the original documentary before the film. He was the studio head that
yeah,
really was in charge of all their films, and he knew entirely everything that happened to We the Living. And he was quite an old gentleman in the late 80s, early 90s when we were planning the first release in America of the film. And luckily, we got to interview him, and you saw clips of it. And that's where we learned a lot of the story. Really, he's just about the only person that I can think of from the original production who was still around to see what we were doing with the film and restoring it. Um, I spoke with Rosanna Brazzi in Rome at length in the 80s and spoke briefly with Alida Valli. This was a momentous film for them. Rosanna Brazzi said it was the most important film that he did, and he did quite a few films. Um, and the film, just from the actor's point of view, from the producer's point of view, it was just such an important film. And and it still is. And I should see if anybody else has some questions. Yes.
Mr. Scott, you probably know better.
wait,
You
hold
know the
that for a
actual.
second. Hold it one second. It needs to be said that the guy who hid the film was taking his life in his hand. I mean, these fascists weren't fooling around, and they actually physically swapped it. So the fascists thought that they had the film that they had condemned. And it hadn't been for this guy, this film wouldn't exist, and you wouldn't be staying up late.
There's so many
Go
times when
ahead,
this
Duncan.
film could be totally lost. It's just an incredible story. Yes, your question?
You know, the premiere date and how long it took before the regime pulled the film?
I don't. Well, the premiere date was in early September of 1942 at the Venice Film Festival. I don't, on the tip of my tongue, have the exact date, but it was the first week of September 1942. It was shown in the big Piazza San Marco in Venice, outdoor screening, just thousands of people, literally. It opened in theaters very soon afterwards, and I don't have the exact date of when it was banned, but it was a period of several months. They briefly had some showings. It was all over Italy, you know, it's a sensation. But they send some prints to other countries, Axis countries like Spain, and then it went to Germany, and then all hell broke loose. The Nazis said, what are you doing?" And that brought it to a head. And
So maybe the Germans played.
yeah, the little detail here about the film that you guys haven't noticed. Any other questions? Yes.
So, how were the scenes deemed objectionable by Rand addressed? Were they excised, or was there dialogue there? I think I detected some dubbing, climactic confrontation with special police at your headquarters.
Yes. So Hank, his question is about the editing, so I'll take it. He was asking the
Yep.
objectionable dialogue that Ayn Rand objected to. How did we remove it from the film? Was it edited out, or was there a dubbing? And the answer is both. Most of it was editing, and that was tricky because we had only a fully mixed soundtrack. The music, the effects, the dialogue were all mixed together. And when you're trying to cut something, and there's music running, for instance, yeah, and you can't do that because it'll mess up the music. So it was tricky, but we found ways to cut scenes and move things around so that the objectionable dialogue, I'd say 90% of it was simply edited out that way. But as you noticed, especially in the trial scene, we had to dub in dialogue because uh, this wasn't just a question of, oh, well, we'll change the subtitles to what she wouldn't object to in English, because she didn't want Italian speaking people to hear this. It was just so offensive to her. And that scene in particular, the character of Andre is just saying things that just were totally against the themes of the book, made no sense whatsoever. And she said, I don't even want that being heard by people who speak Italian. We were preparing the film for an English-speaking audience in America, but it was important to her that that type of thing be dubbed over, so even Italian-speaking people would not hear that kind of dialogue. Yes.
How did you improve the actual images? You know, and then this relates to the soundtrack as well. Did you digitize all of the soundtrack and all of the images and then splice or something? Or
Sure. His question was, how did we digitize everything and to work on the restoration? Is that basically your question? So we took the best film version that we had to, and a wonderful company out in California did a high definition digitizing of the film for us. And it looked great, and it was nice and sharp, but it was full of scratches, full of dirt, jiggling, and there were even frames missing in certain places where it would just go black for half a second, and just a whole myriad other problems. So we had this nice high definition transfer from film to digital, but we thought, you know, terrible to have people to watch it with all the scratches and things. But thankfully, in the last 20 years or so, this wonderful software has been developed that it's almost like magic. It'll go and examine a frame of film and figure out that this little thing is dirt, and this other thing is part of the image and shouldn't be removed. And it'll automatically kind of remove the spot of the dirt by cloning a little bit of, the scene next to the dot. And it's totally not anything you can see. And and we had to do a lot of tweaking and adjusting. Sometimes it would do it too aggressively. Sometimes it wouldn't remove the scratches or dirt well enough. And so we were constantly, monitoring each scene and making those changes. And we digitized, of course, the soundtrack was digitized as well. And we had sound engineers for a variety of reasons. They were based in Germany who did the work on this, and they did a wonderful job of turning fidelity and getting rid of as much of the popping and hissing and so forth that was evident in the soundtrack prior to that. So, yes. Go ahead.
I noticed that the last scene of the story of Kira going across the border in a snowstorm was missing from this. Is there a reason for this?
Yes, Ayn Rand wanted it cut out. Yes. So
Earlier version.
you might have seen deleted scenes from the earlier home video release. We had released the film non-restored with all the scratches, and in that DVD we had deleted scenes that people could see. It was her explicit wish that we only show this version of the film, and so those deleted scenes can only be seen as standalone scenes. And I happened to be with her when she was talking about the end scene that you were asking about. Um, if you've read the book, you know what an amazing final chapter where you're inside Kira's head, um, and even though there's little hope of her escaping from Russia, she's in charge of her own life, and it's brought out beautifully in the book. I can't really paraphrase it, but the way the film was made, it was just a literal. Okay, she's walking to the border, she gets shot, boom, she plops over and she's dead. It's really not at all what she was trying to convey in her book, and she was adamant that she did not want that Italian film ending used in this version of the film.
So real reason behind it, or just she was her opinion?
Because
Like it.
I'm sorry, what's the question again?
Well, why did she want it removed? Was there anything specific other than you described the content and all that.
It totally didn't convey anything that she had been doing in her book. And so she'd rather end the book movie early than do something that's totally in the wrong direction. Yeah, yeah, you could put it that way. Unfortunately, we're out of time, everybody. And I thank you all for coming and being patient while we set this up, and I hope you enjoyed the film. And thank you all for coming. We have a newsletter sign-up sheet where if you sign up, you'll find out when the DVD is going to be released. You'll find out when the streaming version will be available. So there's a sign-up board out there, and I thank you very much for coming.